Hello, welcome to the Franz van Cat interview. I'm Annette Young. As British comic writer Charlie Brooker wrote this week, 2011 has been like an end-of-season finale, a climactic episode in which multiple story arcs have come to a head. And as he goes on to say, how is 2012 going to compete? Well, one important news event on the forthcoming calendar is the US presidential elections, and it seems to be that they've been somewhat overshadowed by the events of the last 12 months. And here to talk about the election campaign with me today is Professor Larry Sabato, a professor of politics at the University of Virginia and a director of the UVA Centre for Politics. Professor Sabato, thank you so much for giving us some of your time.
I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you.
Now, as I just said, the US election campaign seems to have been somewhat overshadowed by international events. But I want to start talking about the Republicans' campaign, and we saw, obviously, in the last few days, the debate and so on. But you've actually been predicting that the Republican race might not indeed be such a closed field.
Yes, the probability is that the nominee is one of the candidates you see standing on the stage. There have been 13 debates now, and the Republican electorate is getting familiar with these candidates. But there's another possibility. The truth is that most Republicans understand this is not their first string. These candidates, on the whole, are unimpressive. Some are really marginal. It's amazing to see them on the stage competing for the presidency. Given that, there's an opportunity around about February in the Republicans' presidential process when there are no primaries or caucuses. That's a time for stirring the pot. And if anyone is wealthy enough, has a substantial public office, can make a case for the presidency, that would be the time to do it, because after a January full of divisive contests, it's possible that Republicans will want to see a new face.
Do you have any idea who that new face might indeed be?
There will be Republicans who will go back to some of the leading GOP candidates who wouldn't run for personal reasons. Governor Mitch Daniels of Indiana, Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey, former Governor Jeb Bush of Florida, President George Bush's brother, although I think there are a lot of problems with that. And there are others. And then there are celebrity candidates. American politics is addicted to celebrity candidates, people who have high name identification because they've been on TV shows or because they're featured a lot in magazines. The Donald Trump candidacy, for example. So there are lots of possibilities. As I say, I doubt it happens, but there's an opening here because of this widespread dissatisfaction with the field. You know what's interesting? As this has gone on, more and more Republicans have become less satisfied with the candidates. The more they see of them, the less they like them.
So is there anyone at the moment who you see as a front runner in the existing pool of candidates?
Well, there are two front runners. The current polling front runner is former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. The other front runner, because of his money and organization, is former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney. To be honest about it, if Newt Gingrich is the Republican nominee, I think we can probably say that President Obama is reelected handily. Most people who follow politics understand that. Amazingly, much of the Republican base does not. They love Newt Gingrich, they love his debating abilities, and they're dying to see him go toe-to-toe with President Obama in the fall debates, even though debates do not necessarily win presidential elections.
Now, in the last debate, however, Newt Gingrich did certainly come under sustained fire, though, didn't he?
Well, yes, because he has moved up sometimes 20, 30 points ahead of Mitt Romney, the number two contender. So naturally, the other candidates are looking at Gingrich and saying, how could this be? He has enough baggage to fill the cargo hold of a 747, and they're going to use that baggage. You'll hear even more of it.
Yeah, but having said that, you know, one of the common criticisms about him is his potential to destruct, isn't it?
Yes, I've watched him for many years, and I'd say he's always about 6 minutes from imploding or exploding. I don't know which. And sooner or later it will happen. The fear of the Republican leadership is that this is going to happen after he gets the nomination, at which point he could sink the entire Republican ticket. They have a good chance to take the Senate. He could ruin that. They currently have the House of Representatives. He could elect Democrats to control the House. So this could be a disaster for Republicans from top to bottom.
In fact, out of the Republican candidates, the one who probably looks the most presidential is Mitt Romney, but himself has come under sort of fire as well from a Democratic super PAC that used his fluency in French to poke fun at what they called his rather wishy-washy politics.
Yes. And of course, this is also a play on what the Republicans did to Senator John Kerry, the Democratic candidate for president in 2004, running against George Bush, who won the second term against Kerry. Look, of these candidates, there is only one who could theoretically compete with President Obama in November, and that, of course, is Mitt Romney. As you said, he looks presidential. He has a presidential resume, not just in politics, but also in private business, and he ran the Olympics. That appeals to a lot of Americans. The problem with Mitt Romney is he comes across as cold and calculating. He has flip-flopped on most of the major issues, at least the social issues, and let's be honest, his Mormonism is a major problem with fundamentalist evangelical Christians that are a big piece of the Republican Party.
Okay, now let's switch to the other side and talk about the Democrats. Now, President Barack Obama evoked the spirit of Teddy Roosevelt recently and railed against wealthy Republicans who he claimed were pushing down the middle class and perpetuating the economic crisis. Is that a message that's going to go down well with the electorate?
It's a message that could sell depending on the Republican nominee. It's a message really designed to run against Mitt Romney. They have always thought in the end they would run against Mitt Romney. Now they're starting to have some doubts. They're wondering if in the end they'll run against Newt Gingrich. It might work against Gingrich too. He's also quite wealthy, but Romney is much wealthier. Look, here's the problem for President Obama. When you get past the rhetoric, the economy in the United States is rotten, as it is in most places around the world. The question is whether anybody's responsible. That's a separate issue. But generally speaking, electorates do hold presidents accountable for bad economies, and President Obama has one of the worst ever.
And having said that, his campaign team is obviously very much pushing the message already that this is a man who ended the war in Iraq. This is the guy who took down Osama bin Laden and weakened al-Qaeda. But you're saying that's not going to account at the end of the day. It's the economy.
Well, those foreign policy issues do matter in the sense that they take away from the Republicans the usual line that Democrats are weak. But I would simply remind anyone who thinks that killing Osama bin Laden will make a difference in the election, I would remind them about President George H.W. Bush, the first President Bush, won a glorious victory in the Persian Gulf in liberating Kuwait. And his popularity went up to 91%. And they were going to have parades all the way to the 1992 election. And of course, he lost decisively to Bill Clinton. In other words, that victory meant nothing in political terms. The same is going to be true for Osama bin Laden.
Now, in terms of President Obama, did he possibly shoot himself in the foot the other day when he told a 60 Minutes journalist that the economic crisis is just so bad that it's going to take more than just one president? In fact, it's going to take several presidents before we see the end of all of this.
Absolutely. I often say that when a politician makes a gaffe, it means he's telling the truth. In this particular case, it is true. This has been such a serious recession, it will probably be 10 years before the world recovers. Well, that's not what an electorate wants to hear when they're considering reelecting a president. They want to hear from the president that if reelected, I will take care of this problem during my term. So Obama went too far. That was a mistake, and it will cost him. It will show up in a TV ad in the fall.
Now, as you know, we often hear, a week is a long time in politics, a year is an eternity. However, how do you see the campaign going, and do you sense that it might favour one side as opposed to the other?
Look at American history. Since 1824, which is when popular elections began, about 2/3 of presidents who sought a second term have in fact won them. So you would always rather be the incumbent president, even in difficult times, because the incumbent president is the pilot of the plane. the challenging candidates are just on the plane. They have to go to the destination chosen by the incumbent.
But if the unemployment continues to rise, the economic bad times continue, it's going to be hard for the voter not to take it out on President Obama, isn't it?
That's correct. And there have been times in American history, and in fact the history of almost all democracies, where weak candidates from the opposition party actually won simply because people were voting in a referendum on the incumbent president and said, I don't much like the opposing candidate, but I can't take 4 more years of this. And that's what happens.
So, as you pointed out, the economy obviously is a very important issue, and this is something that clearly could favour the Republicans. But given what we've seen so far from the calibre of candidates and the response, it certainly doesn't look like they're seizing the opportunity, does it?
That is correct from my perspective. In watching these Republicans, I would have to say it's the weakest field of candidates from either party in modern times. Now, as I've mentioned, Mitt Romney would probably be an acceptable nominee in the general election, and if the economy were bad enough, he could defeat President Obama. Looking at the rest of the field, I can't find a potential winner.
Professor Sabato, thank you so much for being with us. And that's it for this edition of the Frans van Kat interview. Stay tuned for more news and headlines, which are coming up very shortly.